You look brave in that dress. The words sliced through champagne laughter as 500 guests turned to stare at Elena Cross, the bride in a discount gown standing alone at her own wedding reception. Microphones amplified every cruel joke about her background, her salary, her luck in marrying up. Her husband Ryan smiled from his throne of privilege and said nothing. His family performed their ritual humiliation like seasoned executioners. Phones recorded. Cameras flashed. No one saw the small timer glowing on Elena's hidden screen. 7 minutes remained before the $950 million acquisition that would save the Hale empire expired forever. 7 minutes before the poor girl they mocked revealed she held the knife and had been sharpening it for years. Welcome to the most expensive wedding in American history, where revenge was served cold, justice came wrapped in polyester, and an entire dynasty fell between the first dance and the cake. Stay with me until the end, like this video, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story of calculated reckoning has traveled. The mistake the Hale family made wasn't underestimating Elena Cross. It was assuming she could be broken. They were wrong. But that truth wouldn't surface until a ballroom full of Manhattan's elite watched an empire collapse in real time. Until then, Elena played her role perfectly. The quiet girl who smiled too much, apologized too often, and made herself small enough to slip through locked doors. The Grand Celestial Hotel blazed with old money on the night of May 14th. Crystal chandeliers caught light like trapped stars. Ice sculptures melted slowly beside towers of champagne. A 12-piece orchestra filled the air with classical arrangements that cost more per hour than Elena had earned in a month at her old job. Everything gleamed, everything sparkled, everything screamed wealth so loud it drowned out questions, like why the bride wore a dress that looked pulled from a clearance rack, or why her bouquet came from a grocery store, or why she stood alone near the gift table while her new husband held court with investors, one hand on a whiskey glass, the other gesturing broadly at his father's latest corporate triumph. Elena's fingers tightened around the cheap plastic stems wrapped in drugstore ribbon. The flowers were wilting. She'd bought them herself that morning because Ryan's family had forgotten to include her in the floral arrangements. The bridal bouquet his mother ordered had mysteriously been delivered to the wrong address. These things happened, Victoria Hale had said with a smile sharp enough to cut glass when one didn't have experience with proper vendors. Elena had smiled back and said nothing. She was good at saying nothing. "Is that polyester?" The voice carried across 3 tables. Elena turned to see Ryan's cousin Melissa pointing at her dress, champagne sloshing in her glass. "Oh my God, it is! Ryan actually let you wear polyester to the wedding!" Laughter rippled through the nearest guests. Not the polite kind. The kind that fed on discomfort. "Leave her alone, Mel." Ryan's younger brother Derek appeared beside Elena, his bow tie already loosened despite the early hour. He lowered his voice. "Though seriously, Elle, what were you thinking? Mom offered to pay for a real dress." "This is a real dress," Elena said quietly. "You know what I mean." Derek's tone carried the practiced patience of someone explaining obvious things to slow children. "You're a Hale now. People expect—" "What?" Elena met his eyes. "What do people expect, Derek?" He blinked, caught off guard by the direct question. "Just better. You know, better." "Than polyester? Then looking like you can't afford your own wedding?" He winced immediately. "That came out wrong." "Did it?" Before Derek could respond, a microphone whined to life. Victor Hale stood at the head table, silver-haired and commanding in his custom Brioni suit. Ryan's father, the patriarch. The man who'd built Hale Technologies into a billion-dollar empire through what the business journals called aggressive innovation and what Elena's nightmares called murder. "Friends, family, colleagues," Victor's voice boomed across the ballroom. "Thank you for joining us on this joyous occasion. My son Ryan has made many smart decisions in his 32 years, but marrying Elena Cross might be his smartest yet." Polite applause. Elena felt every eye in the room assess her, measure her, find her wanting. "Now, I know what you're all thinking." Victor paused for effect, his timing perfect. "How did a Yale graduate with an MBA and a trust fund end up with a girl who worked at a coffee shop?" The laughter was louder this time. Elena's smile didn't waver. But that's the American dream, isn't it? Victor continued. My son saw potential where others saw, well, let's just say he saw something. More laughter. Ryan raised his glass from his seat, grinning like this was all good fun, like his father's words were affectionate instead of sharp. Elena reminds us that love transcends social class, Victor said, that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places, like clearance racks. The ballroom erupted, guests howled, phones lifted to record the moment. Elena stood perfectly still, her cheap bouquet trembling slightly in her grip. Dad, come on! Ryan's voice carried a note of mild reproach, but he was laughing. They were all laughing. I'm joking! Victor held up his hands in mock surrender. In all seriousness, we welcome Elena to the family. We'll teach her about proper wines, proper clothes, proper everything. She's a quick learner. She'd have to be to land my son. The applause this time felt like judgment wrapped in approval. Elena's throat tightened. Not with tears, with the kind of rage that had learned to compress itself into diamond-hard patience. She glanced at the small screen built into her bouquet's stem, hidden among the wilting carnations, the custom device she'd designed herself. 6 minutes and 43 seconds remained on the countdown timer. Just a little longer. Speech, someone chanted. Others picked up the call. The bride should speak. Victoria Hale appeared beside her daughter-in-law, her Chanel perfume arriving 3 seconds before she did. You don't have to say anything, dear. No one expects you to be comfortable with public speaking. The kindness in her voice was expertly performed. So was the condescension. It's fine, Elena said. I'd like to say something. Victoria's perfectly maintained eyebrows lifted slightly. Are you sure? These are important people. Investors, partners. The Worthington family is here for heaven's sake. I'm sure. Well, Victoria's smile tightened. Keep it brief. And try not to mention your previous employment. Elena walked to the microphone station near the head table. The room quieted gradually, conversations dying in waves as guests registered the cheap dress approaching the expensive sound system. Ryan watched her with mild curiosity. Not concern, not love. Curiosity. Like she might do something amusing. Elena adjusted the microphone down to her height. 5'4" in borrowed heels 2 sizes too big. Thank you all for coming tonight. Her voice carried clearly. She'd practiced projection in a storage unit for 3 months, recording herself, adjusting tone and pace until she could command a room without raising her volume. I know I'm not what many of you expected, Elena continued. Not the right background, not the right education, not the right anything, really. Uncomfortable silence. A few people shifted in their seats. When Ryan proposed, his mother told me I'd need to work hard to fit into this family. Elena's eyes found Victoria in the crowd. She was right. It has been work. So much work. Victoria's expression remained neutral, but her champagne flute paused halfway to her lips. I've worked to understand your world, Elena said. Your values, your priorities. What matters to people like you? People like us? Victor's voice carried an edge now. What does that mean? Elena turned to face him fully. People who believe money determines worth. That pedigree matters more than character. That someone like me, she gestured to her dress, should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity you choose to offer. The room had gone completely still. The orchestra had stopped between songs. Even the waitstaff froze. Elena, Ryan stood, his smile strained. Maybe we should... I'm not finished. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. The room was holding its breath. There's something I need to tell everyone here, about who I really am, and about how your family became so successful, Mr. Hale. Victor's face darkened. Careful, girl, you're embarrassing yourself. Am I? Elena reached into her bouquet and withdrew a small device, sleek, black, expensive-looking, nothing like the cheap flowers surrounding it. She connected it to the ballroom's projection system with practiced efficiency. Let's see who's really embarrassed when this is over. Ryan, control your wife, Victoria hissed. But Ryan wasn't moving. He stood frozen, his face draining of color as Elena's device synced with the projection screens positioned throughout the ballroom. "My name is Elena Cross," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Most of you know me as the poor girl who married up, the coffee shop worker who got lucky. But that's not who I am. It's never been who I am." The screens flickered to life. "My father was Dr. Marcus Cross. Some of you might remember that name." Victor Hale went rigid. 15 years ago, my father developed revolutionary artificial intelligence algorithms for predictive data analysis. Technology that could transform entire industries. He was brilliant, generous. He wanted to change the world. Elena's voice didn't waver. Victor Hale wanted to own it. "This is slander." Victor's face had gone crimson. "Security! Remove her!" But no one moved. Every eye was locked on the screens as documents appeared. Patents, emails, technical specifications. All dated, all authenticated, all damning. "My father trusted Victor," Elena continued. "They were partners, friends even, until the night my father died in what was ruled an accidental fall from his office building." Her hands were steady on the microphone. 3 days later, Victor Hale filed patents for my father's technology under his own name. The same technology that built Hale Technologies into what it is today. "She's lying," Victoria's voice cracked. "She's mentally unstable. Ryan, do something." Ryan hadn't moved. He stared at Elena like he'd never seen her before. "I was 10 years old when they killed my father," Elena said. Each word fell like a stone into water. "My mother and I were left with nothing. No patents, no compensation, no justice. We survived on her waitress salary and my weekend cleaning jobs. She worked herself sick trying to keep us housed and fed. Literally sick. She died of untreated diabetes complications 5 years later because we couldn't afford proper health care." Elena's voice never broke, never wavered. She'd practiced this too. "So, yes, Mr. Hale. I worked at a coffee shop. I wore cheap clothes. I made myself small and quiet and forgettable. Because I needed you to believe I was nothing. I needed you to let me close, to trust that I was exactly what I appeared to be." She pressed a button on her device. New images appeared on the screens, photographs of Elena in tailored business suits, sitting in boardrooms, shaking hands with executives. Official company headshots. "My real name is Dr. Elena Cross, Ph.D., in computer science from MIT. Graduate degree in business administration from Stanford. For the past 4 years, I've been a senior acquisition authority at Meridian Global Systems, your largest competitor." The ballroom exploded into chaos. People shouted. Phones appeared everywhere. Victor lunged toward the stage, but 2 men in dark suits intercepted him. Federal agents who'd been posing as guests. "The $950 million acquisition deal you've been negotiating with Meridian for the past 8 months?" Elena's voice cut through the noise. "The deal that would save Hale Technologies from bankruptcy after your disastrous quantum project failure? I'm the one who's been handling your company's application." Ryan's face had gone gray. "Elena, what?" "I rebuilt my father's technology, Ryan. Made it better. Sold it to Meridian years ago. The algorithms running their current AI systems? Mine. Built from my father's stolen work, improved with my own innovations. I made Meridian billions. They trust me. They listen to me." She checked the timer on her device. 4 minutes and 12 seconds remained. "And in exactly 4 minutes, the window for finalizing your acquisition deal closes. Permanently. Meridian's board is waiting for my final recommendation right now." Victor had stopped struggling against the agents. His face showed the moment he understood. You can't." "I can." Elena's smile was colder than the ice sculptures melting at the corners of the room. "And I want everyone here to witness what happens next, because this isn't just about business. It's about justice." She pressed another button. The screens shifted to show video footage, grainy but clear. A rooftop. 2 figures arguing, one of them backing toward the edge. "This footage was recovered from a neighboring building's security system last year," Elena said. "The files were corrupted in the original investigation, but with the right technology, my technology, they could be restored." The video played. The audio was rough but audible. Victor Hale's voice, 15 years younger, shouting at Marcus Cross, "You're going to sign those patents over or I'll destroy you. Everything you've built. I won't let you weaponize my work." Marcus Cross's voice, desperate but firm. "This technology was meant to help people." "Then you've made your choice." The video showed Victor surge forward. Marcus stumbled backward. His arms windmilled. He fell. The ballroom had gone silent as a grave. "Murder," Elena said quietly. "Not an accident. Murder." The FBI has had this evidence for 3 weeks, along with financial records showing how Victor paid off the investigating detective, falsified the medical examiner's report, and threatened the one witness into silence. Victoria Hale collapsed into her chair, her face in her hands. Ryan stood like a statue, unable to process what he was witnessing. "I spent 15 years preparing for this moment," Elena continued, "learning everything I could about your family, your business, your secrets. I became everything you needed me to be. I made Ryan fall in love with a fiction. I let you mock me, diminish me, treat me like I was lucky to breathe your air." She looked directly at Ryan. Something flickered in her eyes. Not quite regret. Not quite pity. "I'm sorry you got caught in this," she said. "But you're part of it now. You chose to be when you let your family humiliate me at every turn and said nothing. When you laughed at their jokes. When you agreed I needed to be fixed to be worthy of your name." "Elena, please," Ryan's voice cracked. "I didn't know. I didn't—" "You didn't ask," Elena cut him off. "You never asked who I really was, what I wanted, what I dreamed about. You assumed, like everyone else, that a girl from my background should be grateful for your attention." She turned back to the crowd. "In 2 minutes, I'm going to submit my recommendation to Meridian's board regarding the Hale Technologies acquisition. But first, I want you all to understand something. This dress?" She gestured to the cheap polyester. "I didn't wear it because I couldn't afford better. I wore it because I wanted you to see exactly who you are. I wanted to capture every joke, every insult, every moment of casual cruelty you inflicted on someone you thought had no power." Elena held up her bouquet. "This has been live streaming to multiple platforms since the ceremony ended. Millions of people have watched you laugh at the poor girl in the cheap dress. They've heard every word Victor said about social class and clearance racks. They've seen Ryan smile while his family mocked his own wife." The color drained from faces throughout the room. Phones appeared as guests frantically checked social media. Gasps and curses filled the air. "The hashtag #HaleWedding is currently trending #1 worldwide," Elena continued. "The video has been shared 2.3 million times in the last 40 minutes. Every major news outlet has picked up the story. Your cruelty is public record now, just like your crimes." Victor finally found his voice. "You vindictive little—" "Careful," Elena interrupted. "The FBI is recording everything you say, and they're very interested in your current language choices." One of the agents stepped forward, his credentials displayed. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest for the murder of Marcus Cross, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and about 17 other charges we'll detail at the station." Victor lunged toward Elena. "I'll destroy you. I'll bury you. I'll—" The agents had him restrained in seconds. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists while he screamed threats and obscenities. Victoria remained motionless in her chair, her carefully constructed composure shattered beyond repair. Elena checked her timer. 1 minute and 38 seconds. "Ryan," she said, her voice almost gentle. "You're not being arrested. You genuinely didn't know about your father's crimes. I made sure of that before I proceeded. But you need to understand something." He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "What?" "You married me knowing I was poor and treated me like I should be grateful anyway. You let your family mock me because you thought my background made me lesser. You proposed not because you loved me, but because you thought I'd be easy to control, malleable, grateful." "That's not—" "It is," Elena said firmly, "and now the whole world knows it. Your name will always be associated with this moment. The man who married a woman for convenience and let his family abuse her at her own wedding while she quietly dismantled his empire." She picked up her device and pressed a final button. "The acquisition is denied," Elena said. "Meridian Global Systems officially rejects Hale Technologies' application.
Your company will file for bankruptcy by Monday morning. The board will vote no confidence in your leadership, Ryan. The investors here tonight will pull their remaining capital. It's over. The timer reached 0 and emitted a single clear tone that seemed to echo forever in the silent ballroom. Enjoy your wedding night, Elena said. She picked up her cheap bouquet and walked toward the exit, her borrowed heels clicking against marble floor. Behind her, the chaos erupted in full force. Guests shouted questions. Investors rushed for exits. Reporters who'd infiltrated the guest list produced cameras and microphones. The FBI led Victor Hale away in handcuffs while he screamed about lawyers and lawsuits and corruption. Ryan stood at the head table, the golden boy in his $1,000 tuxedo, and watched his entire world collapse in the time it took for a cheap flower arrangement to wilt completely. Elena pushed through the hotel's front doors into the cool May night. The city lights blurred slightly, not from tears, but from the adrenaline finally crashing through her system after years of careful control. She pulled out her personal phone and dialed a number she'd kept saved for 15 years. Mrs. Chen, it's Elena Cross, Marcus's daughter. Yes, ma'am. Yes. It's done. My father's been avenged. Thank you. Thank you for never giving up on finding the truth. I'll tell you everything tomorrow. Tonight, I just wanted you to know. Justice finally came. Yes, ma'am. I miss him too, every single day. Elena ended the call and looked up at the Manhattan skyline. Her father used to bring her to the city when she was small, pointing out buildings and telling her stories about the brilliant people who worked inside them. People who changed the world with their ideas. I changed it, Dad, she whispered to the lights and the darkness. Just like you taught me. Not with violence, not with cruelty, with patience, with intelligence, with the truth. A taxi pulled up to the curb. Elena climbed inside, still wearing her polyester dress and carrying her wilted flowers. Where to? The driver asked. Elena gave him the address of a modest apartment in Brooklyn, her real home, not the penthouse Ryan had shown her as their future together. The place where she'd spent countless nights building algorithms, gathering evidence, planning every detail of this moment. As the taxi merged into traffic, Elena's phone began buzzing with notifications. Friend requests, interview offers, messages of support from strangers who'd watched the live stream, marriage proposals from people who thought public revenge was romantic. She turned off the phone and watched the city slide past her window. The real work would start tomorrow. The foundation she'd been planning, the Marcus Cross Technology Initiative, designed to fund and protect innovative researchers from corporate exploitation. The legal battles that would rage for months as Victor's empire was dissected and redistributed. The interviews where she'd have to relive her father's murder and her mother's death over and over for public consumption. Tonight, though, Elena Cross allowed herself to simply exist in the space between before and after, between the girl who said nothing and the woman who said everything when it mattered most. She touched the cheap flowers in her lap. They'd served their purpose perfectly, hiding technology, concealing truth, allowing powerful people to believe she was exactly what she appeared to be. Sometimes the best weapons looked like weaknesses. Sometimes justice wore polyester. And sometimes the powerless girl at the cruel family's mercy turned out to be the architect of their destruction. The taxi carried Elena through the city her father had loved, past buildings full of people who would wake up tomorrow to news of an empire fallen and a daughter's 15-year plan finally executed to perfection. Elena Cross closed her eyes and let herself feel something she hadn't felt since she was 10 years old, watching them carry her father's body away. Peace. The first chapter of her revenge had closed, but the story of what she'd built from the ashes of the Hale dynasty, the legacy her father deserved, the protection future innovators needed, that story was just beginning, and this time Elena held all the power. The apartment in Brooklyn looked nothing like the penthouse Ryan had promised her. No floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, no marble countertops or designer furniture, just 800 square feet of worn hardwood floors, secondhand bookshelves crammed with technical manuals, and a desk buried under 3 laptops running code that had taken her 4 years to perfect. Elena dropped her wilted bouquet in the kitchen sink and kicked off the borrowed heels. Her feet ached. Everything ached, actually, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from holding yourself perfectly still while the world exploded around you. She'd been running on adrenaline and rage for so long that now, in the quiet of her real home, she felt hollowed out, empty, like she'd poured every ounce of herself into that ballroom and left nothing behind. Her phone buzzed again, and again, and again. She turned it off in the taxi, but it had automatically restarted, and now the notifications came in waves. 3,000 messages, 14,000 emails, reporters, lawyers, people from high school she hadn't spoken to in 15 years suddenly claiming they'd always believed in her. Elena powered it down completely and shoved it in a drawer. The silence that followed felt dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff after years of running toward it. She walked to her desk and opened the locked drawer at the bottom. Inside sat a photograph, the only one she'd kept from before. Her father smiling in his lab coat, one arm around 10-year-old Elena, both of them covered in flour from an experiment gone wrong in their kitchen. Marcus Cross had believed science should be fun. That discovery was meant to be shared, not hoarded. "We did it, Dad," Elena whispered to the picture. "Victor's going to prison. The company's finished. Everyone knows the truth." The photograph smiled back, frozen in a moment 15 years gone. Elena's hands started shaking, then her arms, then her whole body. She sank to the floor beside her desk and let herself break apart in the darkness of her empty apartment, sobbing into her knees while her cheap dress pooled around her like a collapsed parachute. She'd won. She'd destroyed them. So why did victory feel like drowning? The shaking eventually stopped. Elena pulled herself up, washed her face, and changed into an old MIT sweatshirt and cotton pants. Real clothes. Her clothes. She made chamomile tea because her mother used to say it helped with overwhelm, and sat at her desk staring at the dark laptop screens. Tomorrow, the real work started. Tonight, she just needed to survive the quiet. Her backup phone, the one only 3 people knew about, rang at 2:47 a.m. Elena almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed Chen, and that made all the difference. "Mrs. Chen, is everything okay?" The voice on the other end came ragged with crying. "Elena, sweetheart, I've been watching the news for 6 hours. They're showing the video. They arrested him. They actually arrested him." Margaret Chen had been Marcus Cross's lab assistant, his friend, the only witness to Victor Hale's threats in the weeks before Marcus died. She tried to tell the police what she knew, but Victor's money had bought silence and intimidation in equal measure. Margaret lost her job, her reputation, her marriage. She'd spent 15 years carrying guilt for not doing more. "We got him," Elena said softly. "We finally got him. Your father would be so proud of you." Margaret's voice broke. "So proud." "But Elena, honey, are you safe? These people are dangerous. Victor has connections, money, had money," Elena corrected. "By Monday morning, he won't have access to anything except a public defender. The FBI seized everything tonight. Bank accounts, properties, stock holdings. He's finished, Mrs. Chen." "And the son? Ryan?" Elena's throat tightened. "He didn't know about the murder. I made sure he was clean before I proceeded, but he's complicit in everything else. The cruelty, the casual destruction of anyone they considered beneath them. He chose that life, that behavior, every single day. Do you love him?" The question sat heavy between them. "I loved the person I created," Elena admitted. "The role I played. Loving him was part of the cover. But the real Ryan, the man who let his family mock me, who thought my poverty made me grateful to exist in his world?" She paused. "No. I don't think I ever knew him well enough to love him, and he certainly never knew me." They talked for another hour. Margaret shared stories about Marcus that Elena had never heard, his terrible jokes, his habit of singing off-key while running calculations, his absolute conviction that technology should serve humanity rather than profit. By the time they said goodbye, Elena felt slightly less hollow. She slept for 3 hours, dreamless and heavy. The knock on her door came at 7:15 a.m. Elena checked the security camera she had installed herself and saw 2 people she recognized immediately, James Rivera and Sarah Park from Meridian Global Systems, her actual employers. The ones who'd approved her undercover operation and given her the authority to execute it. She opened the door. "You're up early." "So are you." James stepped inside, carrying a briefcase and an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Sarah followed, her usual crisp professionalism softened by something that looked like concern. "The board wants a full debrief at 10, Sarah said without preamble. "The PR team is losing their minds. Legal is having a field day, and the investors are split between thinking you're a genius and thinking you've exposed the company to massive liability." Elena moved to her kitchen and started making coffee. "I documented everything. Every step was legal. The FBI was involved from the moment I brought them the recovered footage. Meridian is protected." "Protected?" James laughed, but it sounded strained. "Elena, you live-streamed the destruction of a competitor while posing as their son's wife. The optics are exactly what I planned." Elena handed him a mug. "Meridian comes out of this looking like the company that stood against corporate corruption. We protected an employee's pursuit of justice. We showed the industry that we value integrity over profit. Our stock price is going to soar." Sarah sat down at Elena's small kitchen table, her sharp eyes scanning the modest apartment. "This is really where you've been living while playing the poor girlfriend?" "I wasn't playing," Elena said. "This is who I am. The penthouse was the fiction. This is real." "The PhD is real," James corrected. "The senior position at Meridian is real. The algorithms you developed that revolutionized our AI division, those are real. Elena, you're worth millions in salary and stock options alone. Why live like this?" Elena sipped her coffee and chose her words carefully. "Because the moment I started believing I deserved luxury for its own sake, I'd become exactly like them. My father lived modestly. My mother worked herself to death in cheap apartments. I won't dishonor that by pretending I earned what I have through anything but their sacrifice in my own work." Silence settled over the kitchen. "The board wants you at headquarters in 2 hours, Sarah finally said. "Full senior leadership is convening. This is big, Elena, bigger than anything we've handled before." "I know." Elena set down her mug. "I'm ready." But as she showered and dressed in her real clothes, the tailored pantsuit she'd kept hidden in her closet, the professional heels that actually fit, the subtle jewelry that marked her as someone with authority, Elena wondered if she was actually ready for what came next. Destroying an empire was one thing. Building something better from the rubble was infinitely harder. The Meridian Global Systems headquarters occupied 43 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. Elena had worked here for 4 years, but always quietly, always in the background. Senior Acquisition Authority sounded impressive, but she'd deliberately kept a low profile. Most employees didn't know her name. That anonymity had been essential for infiltrating the Hale family. Now as she entered the building with James and Sarah flanking her like bodyguards, every head turned. Whispers followed her to the elevators. Phones appeared, recording her progress through the lobby. "They've seen the video," Sarah murmured. "Everyone's seen it." The executive floor was chaos, conference rooms full of shouting lawyers, PR specialists rushing between offices with tablets and frantic expressions. Junior analysts clustered around monitors showing news coverage of the Hale wedding meltdown. Elena caught fragments as she walked past. "Stock up 17%. FBI confirming the murder charge. Ryan Hale released a statement denying knowledge. Hashtag is still trending." The boardroom fell silent when she entered. 12 senior executives sat around an obsidian table that probably cost more than Elena's entire apartment. At the head sat Catherine Mercer, Meridian's CEO, a woman who'd built her career on calculated risks and strategic brilliance. "Dr. Cross," Catherine's voice gave nothing away. "Please, sit." Elena took the empty chair between James and Sarah. Every eye in the room fixed on her with expressions ranging from admiration to barely concealed horror. "I've reviewed the operation documentation," Catherine began, "the FBI collaboration, the evidence gathering, the live stream execution, all technically legal, all properly authorized through appropriate channels." She paused. "It was also the most spectacular corporate assassination I've witnessed in 30 years. Elena kept her expression neutral. "Victor Hale murdered my father and stole his work. I had evidence, resources, and authorization. I used them." "You used them brilliantly," Catherine corrected. Hale Technologies' stock price has collapsed. Their board is in emergency session. 3 major investors have already pulled funding. Their creditors are circling. By Monday, they'll be filing Chapter 11. She leaned forward. We're being offered first option on their entire patent portfolio. Every algorithm, every system, every piece of technology they built on your father's stolen work. For pennies on the dollar. The room held its breath. No, Elena said. Catherine's eyebrows lifted. No? Those patents are tainted, built on theft and murder. I don't want Meridian touching them. Elena met the CEO's eyes steadily. But I want them donated to a new foundation. The Marcus Cross Technology Initiative. It will be an independent nonprofit that licenses the technology to researchers and companies committed to ethical development. All proceeds fund scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds pursuing STEM degrees. Silence stretched like taffy. You want us to walk away from billions in potential value, one of the board members said slowly, and hand it to a charity? I want you to do the right thing, Elena replied, and I want Meridian to be publicly associated with that choice. The company that stood against corruption, that valued justice over profit, that built something good from something terrible. Catherine studied Elena for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, not the corporate kind. The PR value alone would be extraordinary. Meridian as the ethical leader in tech development, the company that turned down billions to honor a murdered innovator. Our competitors would lose their minds, another executive added, warming to the idea. We'd dominate the news cycle for months. Every think piece would position us as the moral alternative to Silicon Valley greed. And the foundation? James asked. Who runs it? Elena does, Catherine said. She takes a leave of absence from her current position. Meridian provides initial funding and administrative support. We maintain advisory capacity, but she has full operational authority. It becomes her legacy project. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was more than she'd hoped for, more than she'd planned. I accept, she said, on one condition. Of course there's a condition. Catherine's smile widened. What is it? Margaret Chen, my father's former lab assistant, joins as deputy director. She understands his work better than anyone alive. She deserves to see his vision finally realized properly. Done. Catherine stood, extending her hand across the table. Welcome to the next chapter, Dr. Cross. Let's build something that matters. The meeting dissolved into logistics discussions and planning sessions. Elena found herself surrounded by people asking questions, offering support, sketching out timelines. The foundation could launch within weeks. The patent transfer would take months, but was legally straightforward given Victor's criminal charges. The media strategy needed careful calibration, but the story practically wrote itself. By the time Elena emerged from headquarters 5 hours later, her phone had been restored and was vibrating continuously with messages. The news coverage had shifted. Initial shock over the wedding spectacle had evolved into deeper analysis. Business journals dissected Hale Technologies' collapse. Legal experts debated the murder evidence. Technology columnists examined Marcus Cross's original work and its far-reaching impact on modern AI development. But the story that dominated every platform was simpler. The poor girl in the cheap dress who'd spent 15 years planning the perfect revenge. Elena stopped at a food cart near Times Square and bought a hot dog, ignoring the double takes from passers-by who recognized her from the viral video. She ate standing up, watching the massive digital billboards cycle through advertisements and breaking news. Her own face appeared on 3 screens simultaneously. The image from the wedding, her standing at the microphone in her polyester dress, cheap flowers in hand, expression calm as stone. The caption read, "Revenge served cold, tech heiress takes down father's killer at own wedding." Tech heiress. The phrase felt foreign. Elena had never thought of herself that way. She was Marcus Cross's daughter, Margaret Chen's protege. A woman who'd worked herself through MIT on scholarships and spite. The money, the position, the authority, those were tools, means to an end. But now the end had arrived, and Elena wasn't sure who she was supposed to be anymore. Her personal phone rang. Unknown number. Elena almost declined, but something made her answer. Dr. Cross? The voice was male, young, nervous. My name is David Hale. I'm Ryan's younger brother. We met briefly at the rehearsal dinner. Elena remembered him vaguely. 26, fresh from business school, quieter than the rest of the family. He'd asked her about her background with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "What do you want, David?" "I want to apologize." He spoke quickly, like he'd practiced. "For my family, for every terrible thing they said and did. I watched the video, all of it. I've been sick to my stomach since last night." "You participated," Elena said flatly. "You laughed at the jokes. You benefited from your father's stolen work." "I know." His voice cracked. "I know, and I can't undo that. But I can tell you that I'm cooperating fully with the FBI. I've turned over every document, every email, every conversation I can remember about the company's operations. I'm testifying against my father." Elena stopped walking. "Why?" "Because he murdered someone. Because he built everything on a lie. Because—" David took a shaky breath. "Because you're right about all of it. We thought money made us better, that our name meant something, but we're just criminals in expensive suits, and I don't want to be that anymore." "What about Ryan?" "Ryan's—" David hesitated. "He's not handling this well. He released a statement denying knowledge, which is true, but he's also hired a PR firm to rehabilitate his image. He's positioning himself as a victim." "Your victim?" Elena laughed, sharp and bitter. "Of course he is. I wanted you to know that not all of us are like that. Some of us are trying to do better, to be better." David paused. "And I wanted to thank you for having the courage to do what you did. My father destroyed your family. You could have destroyed him violently. Instead, you did it with truth and evidence and patience. That's real strength." They talked for another 10 minutes. David explained that he was quitting business, going back to school for social work. He wanted to work with at-risk youth, help kids who reminded him of the one Elena had been, brilliant and powerless and overlooked. He asked permission to volunteer with her foundation someday after he'd proven himself worthy of the second chance she'd inadvertently given him. Elena didn't promise anything, but she didn't refuse either. When the call ended, she stood in Times Square watching tourists take selfies and street performers dance for dollars, and felt the first genuine spark of hope she'd experienced in years. Maybe this was the point. Not the destruction, not the revenge, but what came after. The people who chose differently because they'd witnessed the cost of cruelty. The systems that changed because one woman refused to stay silent. Her father had believed technology should serve humanity. Elena was beginning to understand that justice should, too. Not just punishment for the guilty, but opportunity for everyone who'd been told they didn't matter. The foundation, the scholarships, the protection for innovators who came from nowhere with everything to prove. That was the real work. That was the legacy worth building. Elena finished her hot dog and headed for the subway. Tomorrow she'd start assembling a team. Reach out to Margaret, file the nonprofit paperwork. Begin the slow, unglamorous work of turning viral revenge into lasting change. But tonight, she had one more call to make. She dialed from her apartment, staring at her father's photograph while the phone rang. "Ryan Hale." His voice sounded hollow, defeated. "It's me," Elena said. Silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. 15. "Why are you calling?" Ryan finally asked. "Haven't you destroyed enough?" "I'm calling because I need you to understand something. This wasn't personal. You married me under false pretenses. You systematically dismantled my family's company. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. How is that not personal?" Elena closed her eyes. "Your father murdered mine. That's personal. Everything else was just strategy." "I didn't know." Ryan's voice rose. "I didn't know about any of it. The murder. The stolen patents. I'm as much a victim here as you are." "No," Elena said firmly. "You're not. You didn't know about the murder, but you knew your family treated people like me as lesser. You participated in that. You laughed at those jokes. You let your mother call me trailer trash and your father mock my clothes, and you smiled like it was all good fun because you thought I should be grateful to be there. I loved you. You loved the idea of me. The grateful girl who'd worship you for saving her from poverty. That's not love, Ryan. That's ownership. He was crying now. Elena could hear it in his breathing. What am I supposed to do now? Everyone thinks I'm complicit. My name is poison. I've lost everything. Then build something new. Elena opened her eyes. You have an MBA. You have connections that aren't tainted by your father's crimes. You have a brother who's choosing to be better. You could join him. Or you could keep playing the victim and wondering why no one believes you've changed. I don't know how to be anything else. Then learn. Elena's voice softened slightly. I spent 15 years learning to be something other than the broken girl who lost everything. It's hard, it's painful, but it's possible. You just have to decide you want to. Do you hate me? Ryan asked. Elena considered the question honestly. No, I feel sorry for you. You had every advantage and learned nothing except how to coast on inherited privilege. But hate? That would require me to have cared more than I did. She hung up before he could respond. The apartment felt different now, less like a hiding place and more like a launch pad. Elena looked around at her secondhand furniture, her crowded bookshelves, her wall of technical diagrams and code snippets. This was who she'd been, who she'd needed to be to survive. Tomorrow she could start becoming someone new, someone who built instead of destroyed, who created opportunity instead of claiming revenge. But tonight, Elena Cross allowed herself to simply exist in the quiet space between endings and beginnings, holding her father's photograph and remembering that the best legacy wasn't perfection, it was persistence. She'd persisted through poverty and loss and 15 years of careful planning. Now she'd persist through building something that would outlive them all. The phone buzzed one final time. A text from Catherine Mercer. Board-approved foundation funding, $50 million initial commitment. Let's change the world, Dr. Cross. Elena smiled at the screen, at her reflection in the darkened window, at the possibility glowing soft and steady in her chest. Watch me, she whispered to the city, to her father's memory, to the girl she'd been, and the woman she was becoming. Just watch me. The Marcus Cross Technology Initiative officially launched 6 weeks after the wedding that broke the internet. Elena stood in a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn, the same neighborhood where she'd lived in her modest apartment, the same borough where her mother had died without adequate health care, and watched 200 people file in for the opening ceremony. Journalists, tech executives, students from City College, and community programs. Margaret Chen stood beside her, both of them wearing simple professional attire that cost a fraction of what Victoria Hale used to spend on lunch. Your father would have loved this space, Margaret said quietly, her eyes scanning the exposed brick walls now lined with workstations and collaborative areas. He always said the best innovations came from people working together, not locked away in corporate towers. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The foundation occupied 12,000 square feet of what had once been a textile factory. The building had history, immigrant workers, union organizing, the kind of gritty New York story her father had always appreciated. She'd chosen it deliberately. No gleaming glass, no sterile corporate aesthetic, just honest space for honest work. The crowd quieted as Catherine Mercer approached the small podium positioned near the main work area. Thank you all for coming, the Meridian CEO began. Today marks something rare in the technology industry, a moment where we choose principle over profit, justice over expedience, and legacy over quarterly earnings. Elena watched faces in the crowd. Some she recognized from news coverage of the trial. Victor Hale's prosecution had moved with unusual speed, pushed forward by overwhelming evidence and public pressure. The recovered video footage, the financial records, Margaret's testimony, and a parade of witnesses who'd finally found courage to speak had painted a damning picture. Victor had been denied bail. His trial was set for September, but his lawyers were already negotiating a plea deal. Ryan hadn't attended today. Neither had Victoria, though she'd sent a brief note of apology that Elena had read once and filed away without response. Some wounds didn't heal through words. Dr. Elena Cross exemplifies what's possible when brilliant minds refuse to accept injustice, Catherine continued. She could have chosen violence, chosen bitterness. Instead, she chose patience, evidence, and the law. And now she's choosing to transform personal tragedy into public good. Applause rippled through the space. Elena felt exposed, like standing naked in a spotlight. She'd never wanted to be the story. She'd wanted her father to be the story. His work, his vision, his sacrifice. Elena? Margaret touched her arm gently. They're waiting. Right, her speech. Elena had written and rewritten it a dozen times, trying to find words that honored her father without making the foundation about revenge. She approached the podium on unsteady legs. The crowd fell silent. Every phone was recording. Elena recognized that now, the weight of public attention, the way her every word would be dissected and analyzed and turned into content for platforms she barely understood. My father, Dr. Marcus Cross, believed that technology was fundamentally democratic, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. That innovation shouldn't belong only to the wealthy or the connected. He worked in his garage. He collaborated with anyone who shared his curiosity. He believed the kid from nowhere might have the idea that changed everything, if only someone gave them the chance. She paused, looking at the students clustered near the front, young faces reflecting a dozen different backgrounds, all of them hungry for opportunity the way she'd been hungry at their age. This foundation exists to honor that belief. We're not here to make millionaires. We're here to protect innovators from exploitation, to fund research that serves humanity rather than shareholders, and to ensure that the next brilliant kid from a difficult background doesn't have to spend 15 years seeking justice. They can spend those years creating the future instead. More applause, but Elena raised her hand. I need to be clear about something. What I did to the Hale family, the infiltration, the public exposure, that was personal. It was about my father's murder and my mother's suffering. But this foundation isn't about revenge. It's about prevention, about building systems that make it harder for powerful people to destroy vulnerable innovators. If we do this right, no one else should have to do what I did. They should have protection, support, resources, justice that doesn't require destroying yourself to achieve. The words hung in the air like a promise. Elena stepped back from the podium and let Catherine take over with the technical details, grant applications, research partnerships, scholarship programs. She found a quiet corner near the back and tried to breathe through the anxiety clawing at her chest. That was good. The voice came from her left. Elena turned to find a woman about her age, South Asian, wearing a blazer over a t-shirt that read "Code Like a Girl." Really good. I'm Priya Sharma. I run a nonprofit that teaches programming to low-income high school students. I'd love to talk about potential partnership opportunities. They exchanged information. Then a man introduced himself as a patent attorney who'd spent 20 years watching corporations steal from individual inventors. Then 3 students from different colleges asked about internship programs. Then a journalist requested an interview. Then someone from the mayor's office wanted to discuss city funding opportunities. Elena found herself in back-to-back conversations for 2 hours until Margaret physically pulled her away and shoved a bottle of water into her hands. Breathe, Margaret ordered. You're going to pass out. There's so much to do. So many people need help. We're just getting started and already... Elena, Margaret's voice sharpened. You carried the weight of revenge for 15 years. Don't immediately bury yourself under the weight of saving the world. You're allowed to pace yourself. But pacing felt impossible when her inbox contained 400 requests for assistance, graduate students whose advisors had stolen their research, developers whose code had been appropriated by employers, inventors who'd been squeezed out of their own companies through predatory contracts. Every message was a small version of her father's story, and Elena felt responsible for all of them. The Foundation's first official case came 3 weeks later. A 23-year-old named Marcus, the coincidence wasn't lost on anyone, had developed a revolutionary battery storage system while working for a major automotive company. The company claimed ownership of all employee innovations, even those developed on personal time with personal resources. They'd fired Marcus when he refused to sign over his patents, then launched their own version using his designs. Elena sat across from Marcus in the Foundation's small conference room and saw herself reflected in his exhausted defiance. "Tell me everything," she said. "Every detail. Every conversation, every email." He'd kept records, good ones, documentation of his personal lab work, time-stamped code repositories, witnesses who'd seen him working on the project before his employment. The company had been sloppy, confident that a kid from Queens wouldn't have resources to fight back. They were wrong. Elena brought in the patent attorney she'd met at the launch event, connected Marcus with a litigation firm willing to take the case pro bono for the publicity value, used her own platform to publicize the story, generating media pressure that made the automotive company's stock price dip 3% in a single day. Within a month, they settled. Marcus retained his patents, received compensation for the stolen work, and got a public apology. The company revised their employment contracts to clarify that personal projects remained personal property. It was a small victory, a single case, but it mattered. "You're building precedent," the patent attorney told Elena over coffee. "Every case like this makes the next one easier. You're changing the calculation for corporations, making exploitation more expensive than ethical behavior." Elena wanted to believe that, but the requests kept coming, and not all of them had happy endings. Some innovators had signed away their rights without understanding. Some lacked any documentation. Some were fighting companies with legal budgets larger than the foundation's entire operating capital. The frustration built like pressure behind a dam. Elena found herself working 18-hour days, reviewing cases, strategizing approaches, reaching out to lawyers and journalists and activists who might help. She barely slept, barely ate. Margaret started leaving sandwiches on her desk with notes that said, "Eat this or I'm calling Catherine." The breaking point came on a Tuesday in August. Elena was reviewing a case involving a teenage girl whose school had patented her science fair project without permission when her personal phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Dr. Cross, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with the NYPD. I'm investigating a complaint filed by Ryan Hale regarding harassment." Elena's blood went cold. "What?" "Mr. Hale claims you've been contacting him repeatedly, making threats, attempting to extort money. He's provided evidence of phone calls and text messages." The detective's voice was professional but skeptical. "Can you tell me about your relationship with Mr. Hale?" "We were married, briefly. The marriage was annulled 3 weeks ago." Elena's mind raced. "I've called him exactly once since the wedding. No texts, no contact besides that single conversation where I advised him to seek counseling and move forward with his life. Mr. Hale has phone records showing 17 calls from your number over the past month, and screenshots of threatening messages." That's impossible. But even as Elena said it, she understood. Ryan wasn't above manufacturing evidence. His PR rehabilitation wasn't working. The public had decided he was either complicit or pathetically oblivious, neither of which made him sympathetic. He needed a new narrative. Abusive ex-wife made a good story. "I'd like you to come to the station and provide your phone records," Detective Morrison said, "and any other evidence of your communications with Mr. Hale. I should tell you, I've been following your foundation's work. I'm inclined to believe you're legitimate, but I have to investigate every complaint." Elena provided her records within 2 hours. Her actual phone records showing one outgoing call to Ryan's number and no text messages. But she also discovered something that made her stomach drop. Someone had spoofed her number. The calls Ryan claimed to have received had come from a number that appeared to be hers, but originated from a burner phone purchased with cash in New Jersey. "It's a setup," Elena told Detective Morrison, spreading printouts across the station's conference table. "Someone wants to discredit me, make me look unstable, damage the foundation's reputation." "Any idea who?" Elena had several ideas. Victoria Hale, desperate to rehabilitate her family's image. Competitors who resented Meridian's positive publicity. Corporate lawyers who saw the foundation as a threat to profitable exploitation. Take your pick. The detective investigated for 3 weeks and eventually cleared Elena of all allegations. But the damage was done. News outlets ran stories about the harassment claims with headlines that suggested smoke and fire. Online trolls flooded the foundation's social media with accusations. 3 pending cases withdrew their applications, afraid of being associated with controversy. Elena sat in her office late one night, staring at the wall where she'd hung her father's photograph, and felt the weight of everything crushing down. "Talk to me." Margaret appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. She set one in front of Elena and settled into the opposite chair. "You've been invisible for days. The team is worried." "Someone's actively sabotaging us," Elena said flatly. And I don't know how to fight an enemy I can't identify. Victor's in jail. Ryan's discredited. But someone with resources and motivation is trying to destroy what we're building. Margaret sipped her tea thoughtfully. When your father faced opposition, he used to say the best response to lies was persistent truth. Keep doing the work. Let results speak louder than accusations. That's easy when you're not exhausted. Elena rubbed her face. I'm so tired, Margaret. We've helped 8 people in 3 months. 8. There are hundreds waiting, thousands who never even apply because they don't think anyone will help. And I'm stuck defending myself against fake harassment charges while the real work sits undone. Then delegate. Hire more people. Build a team that can carry the load. With what money? We're burning through funding faster than projected. Every case costs legal fees, investigator fees, expert witness fees. The $50 million Catherine gave us seemed infinite at first. Now I'm watching it drain away and wondering how long we can sustain this. Margaret set down her cup. Elena, look at me. Elena met her eyes. You're not responsible for solving every injustice in the world. Your father wasn't. I'm not. This foundation isn't. We do what we can with what we have, and we build capacity over time. But if you destroy yourself trying to save everyone, you save no one, including you. The words hit harder than Elena expected. She'd spent so long planning revenge, then executing it, then immediately pivoting to building the foundation. She hadn't stopped, hadn't processed, hadn't given herself space to be anything except productive and purposeful and relentlessly forward-moving. I don't know how to stop, Elena admitted. Every time I slow down, I see my father falling, my mother dying, all the ways powerful people destroy vulnerable ones. And I feel like if I'm not actively fighting that every second, I'm complicit. You're human, Margaret said gently. Grieving, traumatized, in need of actual rest and recovery. The foundation will survive you taking a weekend off. The cases will wait. Your father would want you to live, Elena, not just work yourself to death avenging him. They sat in silence while the office's air conditioning hummed and the distant city rumbled beyond the walls. I'll think about it, Elena finally said. But thinking about it and actually doing it were different things. Elena tried to delegate, tried to step back, tried to let her small team handle intake while she focused on strategy. It lasted 4 days before she was back reviewing every case file personally, convinced no one else would catch the crucial details. The intervention came from an unexpected source. David Hale appeared at the Foundation's door on a Friday afternoon, looking thinner than Elena remembered, wearing jeans and a volunteer t-shirt from a youth center. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, he said when Elena answered the door herself, but I need to tell you something about Ryan. They walked to a coffee shop 3 blocks away. Elena didn't want him in the Foundation space, didn't want the Hale name anywhere near what she was building, but curiosity outweighed caution. Ryan's working with a crisis management firm, David said once they'd settled at a corner table. They're the ones who set up the fake harassment calls. They're planning more. Fake victim testimonials, planted news stories about the Foundation misusing funds. They want to destroy your credibility before the trial. Victor's trial? Elena's coffee turned to acid in her stomach. Why would Ryan care about that? He's not charged with anything. Because if Dad goes down, the family name is ruined forever. But if they can discredit you first, make you look like an unstable person with a vendetta, then maybe they can argue the evidence was tainted, that you manipulated everything for revenge. David looked miserable. Ryan's convinced himself he's the victim, that you seduced and used him. The PR firm is feeding that narrative because it's profitable. How do you know this? He told me, bragged about it actually, thought I'd be impressed by the strategy. David's hand shook around his coffee cup. I recorded the conversation, and I'm willing to testify about it if necessary. I'm done protecting my family's reputation at the expense of truth. Elena stared at this young man who'd grown up with every privilege, who could have easily chosen comfort over conscience. Why are you helping me? Because it's right. Because my father murdered yours. Because my brother is continuing the family tradition of destroying people for personal gain. David met her eyes. And because I need to prove I'm not them. Not anymore. Elena took the recording, brought it to Detective Morrison. Within a week, the crisis management firm was under investigation for multiple ethics violations. Ryan's public statement suddenly dried up. The fake harassment evidence was formally debunked in a press conference that made every major news outlet. But the cost kept mounting: Elena's energy, her focus, her sense of safety. She couldn't walk down the street without checking over her shoulder. Couldn't open her laptop without wondering what fresh attack waited in her inbox. Margaret found her crying in the bathroom one afternoon, makeup smeared, hands shaking. "That's it," Margaret said firmly. "You're taking a week off. Actual time off. No phone, no laptop, no cases." "I can't." "You can. You will. The team will manage. I'll manage. And when you come back, we're having a serious conversation about building sustainable systems instead of running yourself into the ground." Elena wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded and let Margaret drive her to a small cabin upstate that belonged to one of the foundation's board members. 3 hours from the city. No cell service. Just woods and quiet and space to finally stop moving. The first 2 days, Elena paced like a caged animal. Checked her dead phone compulsively, started mentally drafting responses to cases she couldn't access. But slowly, the silence worked its way into her bones. She slept 12 hours at a stretch, read novels for the first time in years, sat on the porch watching deer move through the trees. On the 4th day, she cried. Really cried. Not the brief breakdown she'd allowed herself in stolen moments, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere beyond grief. She cried for her father, for her mother, for the childhood she'd lost and the 15 years she'd spent planning revenge, for the exhaustion of carrying so much rage for so long. When she finally stopped, the sun had set, and the woods had gone dark around the cabin. Elena felt scraped clean, emptied, but also somehow lighter, like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. She returned to the city on a Sunday evening. Margaret picked her up from the train station. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked. Elena considered the question honestly. Scared, tired, but also ready, actually ready, not just performing readiness. "Good, because we need you, not the version of you that's trying to be everything to everyone, the version that knows her limitations and builds around them." The foundation had survived her absence, actually thrived. The team had developed new intake protocols, hired 2 additional case managers, implemented strategic prioritization systems. They'd closed 3 cases successfully while Elena was gone. "See?" Margaret said, gesturing at the reports on Elena's desk. "The world doesn't end when you rest." Elena laughed for the first time in months. Point taken. The work continued, but differently now. Elena learned to delegate, to trust, to recognize that building lasting change required sustainable pace, not sprint to burnout intensity. The foundation developed partnerships with law schools, creating clinical programs where students could gain experience while helping clients. They automated parts of the intake process. They said no to cases outside their scope instead of trying to be all things to all people. Victor Hale's trial began in September. Elena attended every day of testimony, sitting in the gallery with Margaret beside her. She watched her father's murder dissected in legal language, watched Victor's expensive lawyers try to create reasonable doubt from indisputable evidence, watched the jury's faces as they listened to Margaret describe Marcus Cross's final days, his fear, his desperate attempts to protect his work. Ryan attended once, sitting in the back. Elena felt his eyes on her throughout the proceedings but never turned around. Whatever he needed from her, absolution, acknowledgement, another chance to play victim, she had nothing left to give. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon, guilty on all counts. Murder in the 2nd degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice. The sentences would run consecutively. Victor Hale, 71 years old, would spend the rest of his life in prison. Elena expected to feel triumph, vindication, something sharp and satisfying. Instead, she felt tired, sad, aware that justice didn't resurrect the dead or restore lost years, but it mattered anyway. It had to matter. "Your father would be proud," Margaret whispered as they left the courthouse. "Not of the revenge, of what came after, the foundation, the people you're helping, the precedent you're setting." Elena nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. That night, she sat in her apartment, the same small Brooklyn space she'd kept despite offers of larger housing, and updated the foundation's website, added Victor's conviction to the list of victories, posted a statement about justice delayed but not denied. Then she closed her laptop and pulled out her father's photograph. "We did it, Dad," she said to the frozen image. "It's done. He's paying, and now the real work begins, making sure no one else's father gets destroyed the way you were." The photograph smiled back, unchanged, eternally caught in a moment of flower-dusted joy. Elena set it back in its place and looked around her modest apartment. Tomorrow she'd return to the foundation, review new cases, meet with the team, continue building systems that protected vulnerable innovators from powerful exploiters. But tonight, she'd let herself rest in the knowledge that revenge had been claimed, justice had been served, and the hardest part, transforming pain into purpose, was finally, truly underway. The Foundation's one-year anniversary fell on a Tuesday in May, exactly 12 months after Elena had stood in a ballroom wearing polyester and carrying wilted flowers while an empire collapsed around her. She marked the occasion quietly, without ceremony, by reviewing the numbers that told a story more powerful than any speech. 43 cases resolved successfully. 19 patents returned to their rightful creators. 8 predatory contracts overturned. 62 students receiving full-ride scholarships to pursue STEM degrees. 2 pieces of federal legislation drafted with foundation input, both designed to strengthen protections for independent innovators. The numbers felt both enormous and insufficient, proof of progress and reminder of how much remained undone. Elena was alone in her office when the door opened without warning. She looked up to find a woman in her 60s, expensively dressed, with the kind of composure that came from decades of controlling rooms through presence alone. It took Elena 3 seconds to recognize her without the courtroom context. Victoria Hale stood in the doorway of the Marcus Cross Technology Initiative, looking smaller somehow than she had at the wedding. Older. The trial had aged her visibly, carved lines deeper around her mouth, added gray to hair that had always been professionally maintained, introduced a tremor to hands that had once gestured with absolute confidence. "You have excellent security," Victoria said, her voice stripped of its former authority. "I had to convince 3 people I wasn't here to cause problems." Elena's hand moved toward the panic button installed under her desk. "What do you want?" "To talk. 5 minutes. Then I'll leave and never contact you again." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "Please." Every instinct screamed at Elena to refuse. To have security remove this woman whose cruelty had been casual and constant. But curiosity won out over caution. 5 minutes, Elena said, "and the door stays open." Victoria entered and sat in the chair across from Elena's desk without being invited. Up close, the toll of the past year showed even more clearly. This woman had lost everything, her husband to prison, her elder son to public disgrace, her social standing to viral infamy, her wealth to legal fees and seized assets. "I'm not here to apologize," Victoria began. "I know nothing I say could make up for what we did to you, to your father, to your mother, to everyone we hurt through arrogance and greed." "Then why are you here?" Victoria's hands twisted in her lap, her diamond rings long since sold to pay lawyers. "Because I need you to understand something about Victor, about our marriage, about the man who killed your father." Elena said nothing, waiting. "I knew," Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not about the murder. I swear I didn't know about that. But I knew Victor stole the patents. I knew your father trusted him, and Victor betrayed that trust. I knew, and I said nothing because I benefited from the crime." The words hung between them like smoke. "I convinced myself it was business, that your father should have been more careful, that the strong survive and the naive get exploited. I built an entire moral framework around my silence." Victoria's eyes finally met Elena's. "I told myself we earned our wealth, that we were smarter, better, more deserving, and I taught my sons to believe the same lies." "Why are you telling me this?" Elena asked. "Because Ryan came to see me last week. He started therapy, real therapy, not PR strategy sessions, and he asked me why we treated you the way we did, why we mocked your dress, your background, your existence." Victoria's voice cracked. "I didn't have an answer. Or rather, the only honest answer was that we were cruel because we could be, because we'd never faced consequences for cruelty before. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, nothing close to forgiveness, but a kind of recognition. Victoria Hale was finally seeing herself clearly, and the reflection was destroying her.
David's testimony helped convict Victor, Victoria continued. My youngest son stood in court and told the truth about his father, his family, everything we'd built on theft and blood. He chose justice over loyalty, over me. She paused. I'm proud of him. Ashamed it took this long to feel that, but proud. Your 5 minutes are almost up, Elena said quietly. I know. Victoria stood, steadying herself against the desk. I just needed you to hear that not all of us are fighting the verdict. Some of us know we deserve everything that happened. Some of us are trying to be better, even though it's far too late.
She turned toward the door, then paused. The foundation, what you're building here, it's extraordinary. Your father would be proud. Your mother, too. I hope you know that. She left before Elena could respond. The office felt different in her absence, like the air had been disturbed by something heavy moving through it. Margaret appeared in the doorway minutes later. Security called, said Victoria Hale was here. Are you okay? I don't know, Elena admitted. She came to confess, to acknowledge her complicity. I think she needed me to know she understands what they were. Did it help, hearing that? Elena considered the question. Maybe, a little. It doesn't change anything that happened, but it's something to know she stopped lying to herself. The conversation with Victoria stayed with Elena through the rest of the week, coloring her perception of the work they were doing. The foundation had been born from revenge, but it was growing into something more complex. A space where accountability met opportunity, where consequences created change, where admission of wrong could coexist with efforts toward right. The next case that crossed Elena's desk brought that complexity into sharp focus. A 17-year-old named Zainab Hassan had developed an algorithm for predicting infrastructure failure in aging water systems. She'd presented it at a science competition sponsored by a major engineering firm. 3 months later, that firm announced a new product using remarkably similar technology. Zainab had proof of her original work, but no resources to fight a corporation with unlimited legal budget. Elena recognized herself in Zainab's story so clearly it hurt. The brilliant kid from a struggling neighborhood, the innovation born from seeing problems others ignored, the powerful entity that spotted opportunity and took it without asking. But unlike Elena's father, Zainab had somewhere to turn. They took the case immediately. Elena assigned their best patent attorney and personally reached out to journalists who'd covered the foundation's previous victories. Within 2 weeks, the story went viral. Not just the theft, but the broader implications. Zainab's algorithm could save thousands of lives by preventing water system failures in low-income communities. The engineering firm had planned to market it exclusively to wealthy municipalities who could afford premium rates. The public pressure was immense. The firm's CEO appeared on national news trying to defend the appropriation, stumbling through explanations about intellectual property rights and competition rules. But the optics were devastating. A multinational corporation stealing from a high school student, then gatekeeping life-saving technology behind profit margins. They settled within a month. Zainab retained her patents, received substantial compensation, and negotiated a licensing agreement that ensured her technology would be available to any municipality regardless of ability to pay. The firm's CEO resigned under pressure. Their stock price dropped 14%. Elena watched Zainab accept her settlement check with the same expression Elena had worn at Zainab's age. Fierce determination wrapped around bone-deep exhaustion from fighting battles that shouldn't have been necessary. "What will you do now?" Elena asked after the press conference celebrating the victory. Zainab looked at the check, then at Elena. "Go to MIT, study civil engineering, come back and work on infrastructure in communities like mine," she paused, "and maybe someday work here. Help other kids who get stolen from." Elena felt something unlock in her chest. This was the point, not just winning individual cases, but creating a pipeline, protecting innovators who would grow into advocates who would protect the next generation. building a system that perpetuated justice instead of exploitation. "We'd be lucky to have you," Elena said. That night, she stayed late at the office working on expansion plans. The foundation's success had attracted additional funding, grants from philanthropic organizations, donations from tech executives who'd watched the hail takedown and recognized their own industry's predatory patterns. They could open satellite offices, hire more staff, take on more complex cases. Margaret found her at midnight, still reviewing financial projections and staffing proposals. "Go home," Margaret said. "Sleep. This will all still be here tomorrow." "I'm worried about scaling too fast," Elena admitted. "We've been successful because we're small, focused, personal. What if we grow and lose what makes us effective?" Margaret settled into her usual chair. "Your father used to say that growth without purpose leads to bloat, but purpose without growth leads to irrelevance. You have to find the balance." "How?" "By building the systems now, while you're still small enough to be intentional. By hiring people who share the mission, not just the resume. By remembering that the foundation exists to serve others, not to aggrandize ourselves." Margaret smiled. "You've done the hard part, creating something real from pain and rage. The next part is just management. Boring, necessary, unglamorous management." Elena laughed despite herself. "You make it sound so inspiring." "It should be. There's nothing more radical than building institutions that outlast their founders. Your father's work lives through this foundation. Your mother's sacrifice has meaning because of what you've created. That's legacy, Elena. That's how the dead continue speaking." The words settled over Elena like a blanket. She'd spent so long focused on destruction, destroying Victor's empire, destroying exploitation patterns, destroying systemic injustice. But creation demanded different skills, different patience, different courage. The expansion launched in September. The foundation opened offices in Boston and San Francisco, staffed by attorneys, investigators, and case managers who'd proven themselves in similar work. Elena instituted careful protocols to maintain consistency across locations. Every case got the same attention. Every client received the same respect. No one would feel like their suffering mattered less because they happened to be in the wrong city. But growth brought new challenges. A case in Boston went sideways when a junior attorney missed a filing deadline, costing their client critical leverage in negotiations. The San Francisco office struggled with local legal nuances that didn't translate from New York. 2 staff members quit after clashing over case prioritization philosophies. Elena felt herself slipping back into old patterns, working around the clock, trying to personally oversee every detail, convinced that any failure reflected her inadequacy as a leader. The exhaustion returned, the insomnia, the sense that she was drowning in responsibility while everyone watched and judged. The panic attack hit during a routine staff meeting. Elena was presenting quarterly metrics when her vision tunneled and her hands went numb. She excused herself calmly, made it to her office, and collapsed on the floor behind her desk while her heart hammered and her lungs refused to cooperate. Margaret found her 10 minutes later, still gasping, tears streaming down her face. "Breathe with me," Margaret said, sitting on the floor beside Elena. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. You've got this." It took 20 minutes for Elena to calm down enough to speak. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I'm breaking everything I touch. The foundation is falling apart. People are quitting. Cases are failing. I should never have tried to scale." "You're having a panic attack, not a rational assessment of organizational health," Margaret said firmly. "The foundation is doing fine, good even. You're the one who's not fine, and that's okay. Admitting you're overwhelmed is the first step toward getting help." Elena wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded and let Margaret help her to her feet. The therapist Margaret recommended specialized in trauma and high-achieving professionals. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo listened to Elena's story over 3 sessions without interrupting, without judgment, without trying to fix anything. "You built your entire identity around avenging your father," Dr. Okonkwo finally said. "That gave you purpose, direction, something to wake up for every morning. But now that mission is complete. Victor's in prison. The foundation exists. The immediate goal has been achieved, and you're facing the much harder question of who you are when you're not defined by your pain." The observation hit like a physical blow. Elena had never thought of it that way.
She'd assumed the foundation work would simply replace the revenge work, same intensity, different target, but revenge had clear endpoints. Building lasting change was infinite work with no obvious finish line. I don't know who I am without the anger, Elena admitted. It's been my fuel for so long. Then maybe it's time to discover who you are when you're not running on rage. Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward. What do you actually enjoy, Elena? Not what you're obligated to do, not what serves the mission. What brings you joy? Elena opened her mouth and realized she had no answer. When was the last time she'd done something just because she wanted to? When had she last made a choice based on pleasure instead of purpose? I don't know, she finally said. That's your homework, then. Find one thing this week that you do purely because you want to, not because it advances the foundation, not because it honors your parents, just because it makes you happy. Elena spent 3 days paralyzed by the assignment. Every activity she considered felt frivolous or strategic. Reading could inform her work. Exercise could improve her stamina. Cooking could be networking if she invited colleagues. She'd trained herself to see everything through the lens of productivity. Finally, on a Saturday morning, she walked into a pottery studio near her apartment and signed up for a beginner's class. No purpose, no goal. Just her hands in wet clay, trying to make shapes that served no function except beauty. She was terrible at it. Her first bowl collapsed, her second cracked, her third looked like something a child would make and be embarrassed to bring home. But something in the repetitive motion, the focus required, the acceptance of failure as part of the process soothed something raw inside her. First time? The instructor asked, watching Elena wrestle with a lump of clay. That obvious? Everyone's terrible at first. That's the point. You have to be willing to fail 100 times before you succeed once. The instructor smiled. Most successful people can't handle that. They're used to being good at things immediately. Pottery demands humility. Elena thought about that while her third bowl collapsed in a wet heap. About humility. About failure as teacher rather than enemy. About building things that serve no purpose except the joy of building them. She went back the next Saturday, and the one after. Slowly, her hands learned the clay's language. Her bowls stopped collapsing. They were still ugly, still amateur, but they held water, and that felt like victory. The therapy continued through fall. Elena learned to identify her triggers, the cases that reminded her too much of her father's story, the moments when she felt responsible for every injustice she couldn't fix, the insidious belief that resting meant failing. Dr. Okonkwo taught her the difference between healthy dedication and destructive obsession, between honoring the dead and being haunted by them. Your father didn't die so you could work yourself to death avenging him, Dr. Okonkwo said during one session. He died because a violent man chose violence. That's not your fault. The foundation you built is extraordinary, but it can't be your entire existence. You're allowed to have a life beyond this work. The words felt simultaneously obvious and revolutionary. Elena had spent 15 years believing that every moment not spent on revenge or justice was a moment wasted, that her worth was measured by her productivity, that stopping meant surrendering, but maybe stopping meant surviving. Maybe rest wasn't weakness, but strategy for the long game. She started delegating more genuinely, trusting her team leads to make decisions without her approval. She took weekends off occasionally, even when cases were pending. She went to her pottery class and made ugly bowls and didn't feel guilty about the time. The foundation didn't collapse. In fact, with Elena stepping back from micromanagement, the team found their rhythm. Case resolution rates improved. Staff morale increased. The satellite offices developed their own effective practices instead of just replicating New York's approach. Ryan reached out again in November, not through lawyers or press statements, but a simple email to Elena's personal account. I've been in therapy for 6 months, he wrote, actually confronting what I did, not what my father did, what I did, the cruelty I participated in, the privilege I weaponized, the person I was when we were together. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could treat another human being the way I treated you. Someone who could watch his family humiliate his wife and think it was acceptable because she should feel grateful to be there. I'm ashamed. I'm trying to be better. That's all. I hope your foundation continues to thrive. I hope you're happy. You deserve that. Ryan. Elena read the email 3 times, looking for manipulation or strategy, but it felt genuine, stripped of ego, a simple acknowledgement of harm done. She didn't respond. Some acknowledgments didn't require response. Some apologies had to live in the silence of the receiver's choice. Instead, she called David. They'd maintained occasional contact since his testimony, not friendship exactly, but a kind of mutual recognition between people who'd survived the same toxic system. Your brother emailed me, Elena said when he answered. I know. He told me he was going to. I tried to talk him out of it. Figured you'd had enough of our family for several lifetimes. It wasn't terrible, Elena admitted. Actually seemed sincere. He's working on it. Actually working, not just performing rehabilitation for PR purposes. Our mother's influence is finally wearing off. David paused. I'm proud of him, which is weird because he doesn't deserve praise for basic human decency. But given where he started, basic decency feels like progress. They talked for an hour. David had finished his social work degree and was working at a youth center in the Bronx. He'd legally changed his name, dropping the Hale entirely. He was building a life that had nothing to do with his family's wealth or legacy. Do you ever regret testifying? Elena asked. No, never. It cost me my relationship with my mother. She still hasn't forgiven me for helping put Dad in prison, but I sleep at night now. That's worth more than her approval. David's voice softened. You gave me that. The courage to choose truth over comfort. I know you didn't set out to teach me anything, but you did. After the call ended, Elena sat with the strange lightness in her chest. She'd set out to destroy the Hales, but destruction had catalyzed unexpected growth, Victoria facing her complicity, Ryan beginning genuine self-examination, David building a life based on principles instead of privilege. Maybe justice wasn't just punishment. Maybe it was also the space it created for people to choose differently. The Foundation's holiday party happened in December. The office transformed with strings of lights and a catered dinner from a local restaurant. Elena had initially resisted the idea, seemed frivolous when so much work remained, but Margaret had insisted. We're allowed to celebrate, Margaret said. We're allowed to acknowledge what we've built. Your father loved celebrations. He'd have wanted this. So Elena stood in the decorated office surrounded by her team, watching case managers swap war stories and attorneys argue good-naturedly about legal strategy, and scholarship recipients share their academic progress. The Foundation had touched dozens of lives directly and thousands indirectly. The work was far from finished, but tonight they could pause and recognize what they'd accomplished. Speech, someone called out. Others picked up the chant, Speech, speech! Elena reluctantly stepped forward, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. When I started this foundation, I told myself it was about justice, about protecting innovators from exploitation, about honoring my father's legacy. She paused, looking around at the faces watching her. And it is about all those things. But it's also become about community, about building something bigger than any individual, about proving that systems can change when enough people commit to changing them. She raised her glass of sparkling cider. To another year of impossible work, to everyone who believed this mattered, and to the people we've helped who'll go on to help others. That's how we change the world. One case, one person, one act of courage at a time. The toast echoed through the space, followed by applause and conversation and laughter. Elena found herself standing beside Margaret, watching their team celebrate. You did good, kid, Margaret said quietly. Marcus would be proud. Your mother, too. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Later, alone in her apartment, she sat with her father's photograph and her mother's few remaining belongings. A worn apron, a favorite book, a necklace Elena could never bring herself to wear. I'm okay, she whispered to their memories. Finally, actually okay. The Foundation's growing. Victor's in prison. People are being helped. And I'm learning to be someone besides your daughter seeking revenge. Learning to have a life. To make ugly pottery and go to therapy and maybe eventually figure out who I am when I'm not defined by your deaths. The photograph and the apron offered no response. But in the silence, Elena felt something she'd been seeking since she was 10 years old. Permission to be happy, to move forward,
to honor them by living instead of just surviving. She carefully put the mementos away and looked around her apartment, still modest, still filled with secondhand furniture and technical manuals, but also now decorated with terrible pottery bowls, art from scholarship recipients, photos from foundation events, evidence of a life being built. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely built. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new people needing help. The work would continue. It had to continue. But tonight, Elena Cross allowed herself to rest in the knowledge that she'd done what she set out to do. She'd claimed justice, built something lasting, and somehow, in the process, she'd begun to heal. The transformation arrived quietly, the way most lasting changes do. 2 years after the wedding that destroyed an empire, Elena Cross stood in front of Congress delivering testimony on proposed legislation that would fundamentally alter how intellectual property rights protected individual innovators against corporate exploitation. She wore a simple navy suit, expensive now because she could afford it, but chosen for function rather than status. The cheap polyester dress hung framed in her office, a reminder of strategic vulnerability and the power of patience. Members of the committee, Elena began, her voice steady in the ornate chamber. I'm here today not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as someone who built a career from stolen work, claimed justice through evidence rather than violence, and spent the past 2 years helping others do the same. The Marcus Cross Technology Initiative has resolved 147 cases. We've returned patents worth billions to their rightful creators. We've seen predatory contracts overturned, exploitative firms held accountable, and vulnerable innovators protected. But legislation is what transforms individual victories into systemic change. She presented data, case studies, examples of how current laws enabled corporations to strip employees and contractors of their intellectual property through complex contracts and intimidation tactics. The committee members listened with varying degrees of attention, some genuinely engaged, others clearly performing interest for cameras. Politics, Elena had learned, was its own kind of patience game. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Elena answered questions about implementation costs, potential corporate pushback, enforcement mechanisms. She remained composed when a senator from Texas suggested she was simply bitter about her father's death and trying to punish successful businesses. She didn't take the bait, just presented more evidence, more data, more stories of brilliant people destroyed by systems designed to concentrate power and profit. Margaret sat in the gallery, watching Elena command the room the way Marcus Cross had once commanded his lab, with quiet authority grounded in unshakable knowledge. When the hearing finally concluded, Margaret met Elena outside the chamber. Your father would have loved watching you do that, Margaret said. Not the revenge part, this part, changing systems, building protections, making sure his death led to something that outlasts all of us. Elena smiled tiredly. Think we'll get the votes? Eventually. Maybe not this session, but eventually. You planted seeds today. That's how policy change works. Slowly, then all at once. They flew back to New York that evening. Elena stared out the airplane window at clouds lit gold by sunset and thought about how much had changed in 2 years. The foundation now operated in 6 cities with a staff of 43. They'd launched a fellowship program placing young attorneys in public interest positions. They'd created an emergency fund for innovators facing immediate legal threats. They'd partnered with universities to teach intellectual property protection in underserved communities. The work had become sustainable. Not easy, never easy, but sustainable. Elena had learned to delegate effectively, to trust her team, to recognize that she didn't need to personally approve every decision or review every case file. The foundation would survive without her micromanagement. In fact, it thrived with appropriate leadership structure and competent staff empowered to make choices. Her phone buzzed with a message from Zainab Hassan, now finishing her sophomore year at MIT. Saw you on C-SPAN. Absolutely crushing it. These politicians have no idea who they're dealing with. You're going to change everything. Elena replied with a simple thank you, then scrolled through other messages. Updates from case managers, a request for interview from a documentary filmmaker, an invitation to speak at a tech conference, 3 more applications for foundation assistants, each representing someone whose life's work hung in the balance. She answered what needed immediate response and let the rest wait until morning. Dr. Okonkwo had taught her that not everything required instant attention. Some things could sit overnight without the world ending. The apartment in Brooklyn felt like home now in ways it hadn't when she first moved in. She'd added comfortable furniture, better lighting, plants that somehow survived her neglect. The pottery bowls she'd made, still ugly but improving, lined a shelf alongside books and framed photos from foundation events. Her father's photograph remained on her desk, but it no longer felt like a shrine. Just a memory kept close.
Elena made dinner, actual dinner that required chopping vegetables and following a recipe, not just microwaved leftovers eaten while reviewing case files. She'd discovered cooking was meditative when she stopped treating it as obligatory fuel and started seeing it as creative process. The meal turned out decent: pasta with homemade sauce, salad, bread from the bakery down the street. She ate slowly, tasting the food, not scrolling through her phone or reading reports. Just eating. Just being present. It still felt strange sometimes, this permission to exist without productive purpose. But she was learning. Her therapist had helped her understand that the drive to constantly produce came from trauma, the belief that her worth was measured by output, that stopping meant dishonoring her parents' sacrifice, that rest equaled failure. But productivity wasn't virtue. Exhaustion wasn't badge of honor. Sometimes the most radical thing was simply being alive without needing to justify that existence through achievement. The knock on her door at 8 o'clock surprised her. Elena checked the security camera and felt her stomach drop. Ryan Hale stood in her hallway, looking nothing like the golden boy who'd proposed with a ring that cost more than her yearly salary. He'd lost weight, let his hair grow longer, wore jeans and a simple jacket instead of designer suits. He looked, Elena thought, like someone who'd spent 2 years dismantling himself and wasn't sure what he was building in place of what he'd been. She almost didn't open the door. She'd successfully avoided any contact with Ryan beyond that single email exchange. He'd respected her silence, never pushing for response or closure. So why was he here now? Curiosity won again. Elena opened the door but didn't invite him inside. "I know I have no right to be here," Ryan said immediately. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I've been trying to work up the courage to do this for 6 months, and I finally realized if I didn't do it now, I never would." "Do what?" Elena kept her voice neutral. "Apologize. Actually apologize. Not the performative kind I did in that email. I want to look you in the eye and tell you I'm sorry for every terrible thing I did and said and allowed, for treating you like you should be grateful for my attention, for letting my family mock you, for marrying you under false pretenses, because I was marrying a fiction too, Elena. I thought I was getting a sweet, grateful girl who'd be easy to manage. I never bothered to learn who you actually were." Elena leaned against the doorframe. "Why now? Why after 2 years of silence?" "Because I've spent those 2 years in therapy actually confronting what I did. Not just what my father did, but my own choices, my own cruelty, my own complicity. And my therapist finally asked me who I needed to apologize to most. Your name was first on the list." Ryan's hands shook slightly. "I'm not expecting forgiveness. I'm not asking for friendship or closure or anything from you. I just need you to know that I see it now. I see how much I hurt you, how much privilege blinded me to basic human decency, how I participated in your dehumanization and called it love." Elena studied him for a long moment. This wasn't the Ryan she'd married. That man had been confident to the point of arrogance, comfortable in unexamined superiority, unable to imagine a world where he wasn't the protagonist. This person looked hollowed out and rebuilt, familiar, but fundamentally different. "Come in," she finally said. "We're not having this conversation in the hallway." Ryan entered hesitantly, taking in her modest apartment with what looked like genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Elena offered him water, the extent of her hospitality, and they sat at her small kitchen table. "How's your mother?" Elena asked, surprising herself with the question. "Struggling. She moved to Florida, changed her name, trying to build a life away from the scandal. David visits her sometimes. I don't. She can't look at me without seeing what she raised, and I can't look at her without seeing what I learned." Ryan turned the water glass in his hands. "She wrote you a letter once, 6 months after the trial, never sent it. But she told me about it, said she wanted to apologize but knew words were inadequate.
Asked me what someone says after destroying another person's family. What did you tell her? That there was nothing to say. That some things you just have to carry. He met Elena's eyes. I'm carrying it. What we did to you, what I let happen, the person I was when we were together, I carry that every day. Elena sipped her water and chose her words carefully. I need you to understand something. The person you're apologizing to doesn't exist anymore. The girl in the cheap dress playing poor and vulnerable, she was a role I created. You never actually hurt me, Ryan. You hurt a fiction. The real me was always 3 steps ahead, always in control, always using you to get close to your father. That doesn't make it okay, Ryan said quietly. You shouldn't have needed to become someone else to be treated with basic respect. The fact that you had to play a role to infiltrate my family just proves how terrible we were. The observation was more insightful than Elena expected. She reassessed Ryan slightly, recognizing that maybe people could change when they committed to the hard work of examining themselves honestly. Why are you really here? Elena asked again. And don't say just to apologize. You could have written another email. Ryan set down his water glass. Because I'm trying to figure out what redemption looks like, whether it's even possible for someone like me. And you're the only person who might understand what I'm asking. You spent 15 years planning revenge. You got it. You destroyed my family completely and righteously, but then you built something afterward, something that matters. You transformed rage into purpose. He paused. How do I do that? How do I become something other than the villain in your story? Elena laughed, sharp and surprised. You're asking me for life advice? After everything? You're the only person who's ever held me accountable in a way that couldn't be ignored or bought off. You're the only one who forced me to see myself clearly. Ryan's voice cracked slightly. I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm asking if you think people like me can actually change, or if we're just permanently broken by the privilege we were raised in. The vulnerability in his voice felt genuine. Elena remembered Dr. Okonkwo's words about how hurt people could choose to hurt others, or break cycles. Ryan was asking if cycle breaking was possible for people who'd benefited from harm. I don't know, Elena admitted. I'm not sure redemption is something anyone can give you. It's not a destination you reach. It's just choosing differently every day, recognizing harm, making amends where possible, building something better than what you inherited. She paused. David's doing it. He walked away from the name, the money, the legacy. He's working with at-risk kids, living on a social worker's salary, building a life that actually helps people. That's redemption, maybe. Not dramatic, not flashy. Just consistent choices toward being less terrible. David's better than me, Ryan said. He always was. I was too arrogant to see it. Then be more like David, Elena said simply. You have resources, education, skills. Use them to help instead of exploit. Volunteer with organizations serving populations your family harmed. Use your MBA for nonprofits instead of profit maximization. Teach business ethics with yourself as the cautionary tale. She met his eyes. You're asking the wrong question, Ryan. It's not, can I be redeemed? It's, what am I doing today that makes the world slightly less terrible than it was yesterday? Answer that question every morning. Do it consistently for 20 years. Then maybe you'll have built something that matters. Ryan nodded slowly, processing. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 people who'd been married briefly in an elaborate fiction, now just strangers trying to find meaning in the wreckage. The Foundation's doing incredible work, Ryan finally said. I follow the news coverage. Every case you win, every person you help. It's extraordinary what you've built. It's what my father should have been able to build, Elena corrected. I'm just finishing what your father destroyed. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for all of it. Ryan stood. Thank you for letting me say that, for not having me removed by security, for being honest about whether I can change. I won't bother you again. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. Not because of the revenge, although that was terrifyingly brilliant, but because you refused to let trauma define your entire existence. You built something beyond the pain. That's real strength. After he left, Elena sat at her kitchen table for a long time, processing the unexpected conversation. She didn't forgive Ryan. Forgiveness felt irrelevant. He'd wronged a performance, not her actual self, but she recognized his genuine effort to confront his complicity, and that mattered in its own way. Her phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. "Just checking in," Margaret said when Elena answered. "How did the testimony go?" "Good. Exhausting, but good. I think we might actually get some movement on the legislation." Elena paused.
Ryan showed up at my apartment tonight. What? Margaret's voice sharpened with concern. Are you okay? Did he threaten you? No, nothing like that. He came to apologize. Actually apologize, not the PR kind. Asked me how to build a life that matters after being complicit in harm. What did you tell him? To ask himself every day what he's doing to make the world less terrible. To do that consistently for decades. To be more like his brother. Elena smiled slightly. I don't think I forgave him, but I gave him something like a roadmap. Maybe that's enough. They talked for another half hour about the hearing, upcoming cases, foundation logistics. When Elena finally hung up, exhaustion hit her fully. She'd testified before Congress, confronted her ex-husband, and somehow managed to offer guidance to someone who'd participated in her humiliation. It was a lot for one day. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, waking to spring sunlight streaming through her windows and the sound of the city coming alive outside. Saturday morning. No cases to review, no testimony to prepare. Just open time stretching ahead like a gift. Elena made coffee and checked her phone. A message from David. Heard Ryan visited you. Hope he didn't make things weird. He's trying. Not always succeeding, but trying. Proud of you for what you said in Congress yesterday. You're changing the game. She replied with thanks and then called the pottery studio to confirm her class time. Her bowls were getting better, still imperfect, still obviously amateur, but functional and occasionally even pretty. She'd learned to find satisfaction in incremental improvement rather than immediate mastery. The studio was quiet that morning, just Elena and two other students working at their wheels while soft music played in the background. The instructor came by periodically to offer guidance, adjust hand positions, point out where pressure needed to increase or decrease. You're getting much better, the instructor said, watching Elena shape a bowl that was actually symmetrical. Starting to trust the process instead of fighting it. Elena smiled. Took me a while to learn that control isn't the same as force. That's the lesson, isn't it? In pottery and in life. You can't bully clay into cooperation. You have to work with it, respect its nature, apply pressure at the right moments, and let it breathe at others. The instructor moved on to help another student. Elena thought about that while her hands moved through familiar motions. Working with instead of against, applying pressure strategically rather than constantly. Allowing breathing room. The metaphor extended beyond pottery into everything she'd learned these past 2 years about sustainable activism, healthy leadership, and building systems that lasted. She finished 3 bowls that morning. Not perfect, but good. Solid. Evidence of skill developing through patience and practice. The foundation office was technically closed on weekends, but Elena stopped by that afternoon to catch up on paperwork without the weekday interruptions. She found she wasn't alone. 3 staff members were there. Case managers reviewing files, preparing for Monday's hearings, researching precedents. They looked up guiltily when Elena entered, like students caught studying when they should be playing. Don't let me catch you working on weekends, Elena said with mock severity. I've spent 2 years in therapy learning about work-life balance. Don't make me waste that investment. Says the woman who's also here on Saturday, one of them shot back. Elena laughed. Fair point, but I'm only here for an hour. Then I'm meeting a friend for dinner and refusing to discuss anything work-related. It wasn't entirely true. She didn't have dinner plans yet, but saying it out loud made it feel possible. She could text Priya from the coding nonprofit, or David, or even just go to a restaurant alone and read a book while eating slowly. The point was building a life beyond the foundation, beyond the mission, beyond the identity of avenging daughter. She spent her hour reviewing financial reports and grant applications, then kept her promise and left. The city was gorgeous in early evening light, that perfect spring moment when winter's bite had faded,
but summer's humidity hadn't yet arrived. Elena walked instead of taking the subway, letting herself meander through neighborhoods, stopping at a bookstore to browse, grabbing coffee at a shop that wasn't evaluating their supply chain ethics. She ended up at the Brooklyn waterfront, sitting on a bench watching ferries cross between boroughs while joggers and cyclists passed behind her. Her father used to bring her here sometimes when she was small, pointing out the bridges and telling her about the engineers who'd designed them. Elena had wanted to build bridges too back then, literal ones that connected places. She'd built different connections instead, between victims of exploitation and resources for justice, between stolen work and rightful ownership, between trauma and healing. Not the bridges she'd imagined as a child, but bridges nonetheless. Her phone buzzed, a message from Catherine Mercer. Congressional testimony was perfect. Leadership team wants to discuss expansion strategy Monday morning. You've positioned us beautifully for the next phase. Elena started to reply immediately, then stopped herself. Monday morning was 40 hours away. The message could wait until Monday. She put her phone in her pocket and watched the water instead. The next phase. There would always be a next phase. More cases, more legislation, more people needing help. The work was infinite. But Elena was finite. She had limits. Acknowledging those limits wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. She thought about her father, about the joy he'd found in his work, but also in small moments, cooking with her, terrible jokes, singing off-key. He'd never let the mission consume him entirely. He'd remained human, vulnerable, present. Elena had lost sight of that in her years of planning revenge. She'd made herself into a weapon, sharp and dangerous and effective, but weapons weren't meant to be people's entire identity. She was relearning how to be human, how to exist beyond productivity, how to honor her parents by living fully rather than just surviving strategically. It was harder than revenge in many ways. Revenge had clear objectives and endpoints. Being human was messy and uncertain and infinite, but also beautiful, also worth it, also the point of everything. Elena stayed at the waterfront until sunset painted the sky orange and pink and purple, colors her father had loved. Then she walked home through Brooklyn streets crowded with weekend energy. Families and couples and friend groups, all building lives that had nothing to do with justice or trauma or systemic change. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives full of small joys and mundane struggles. She wanted that. Not exclusively. The foundation work mattered deeply, would always matter. But also this. Also the pottery classes and the therapy sessions and the evenings sitting by water watching the world be beautiful for no productive reason. Her apartment welcomed her back with its familiar comfort. Elena changed into pajamas even though it was only 8 o'clock, made tea, and curled up on her couch with a novel that had nothing to do with law or technology or justice. Just a story about people navigating relationships and discovering themselves. Pure escape, pure pleasure, pure. Halfway through the 3rd chapter, she realized she was crying. Not from sadness, from relief, from the recognition that she'd survived, that her parents' deaths hadn't destroyed her even though they'd tried to, that she'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and somehow, impossibly, built something good from it. The foundation would continue. The cases would be won or lost. The legislation would pass or fail. Systems would change slowly or not at all. But Elena Cross had already achieved the most important thing. She'd refused to let trauma have the final word. She'd refused to let powerful people's cruelty define her existence. She'd chosen building over destroying, healing over festering, life over mere survival. That was victory. Not the viral video of the wedding, not Victor's conviction, not even the foundation's success. The real victory was this moment, curled up in pajamas reading fiction, while tears ran down her face, feeling genuinely happy for the first time since she was 10 years old. The next morning, Elena woke naturally without an alarm. Sunday morning. She made breakfast, real breakfast with eggs and toast and fruit, and ate at her table while sunlight streamed through windows. Then she pulled out her father's photograph and her mother's apron and sat with them quietly. "I'm okay," she told them. "Really okay. Finally. The foundation's thriving, Victor's in prison, people are being helped, and I'm learning to be happy, to have a life beyond the mission. I think you'd be proud of that. Not just the justice part, the healing part." She carefully put the mementos away and pulled out her laptop. Not to work, to write. She'd been thinking about documenting the journey, not as memoir, but as guide. What she'd learned about planning long-term justice. How to build sustainable systems for accountability. The importance of therapy and boundaries and not letting trauma consume you. Other people were fighting similar battles. Other people needed strategic guidance for claiming justice without destroying themselves in the process. Elena could offer that, not through the foundation directly, but through sharing what she'd learned. She wrote for 3 hours, the words flowing easily. Writing felt different than case management or testimony preparation. More personal, more vulnerable, but also more true. When she finally stopped, she had the outline of something that might become a book, or a guide, or just documentation for her own processing. It didn't matter. The act of writing it helped her make sense of everything that had happened. Monday morning came with its usual chaos, staff meetings and case reviews and strategy sessions, but Elena found she could engage without being consumed, could care without being overwhelmed, could lead without needing to control every detail. During the leadership meeting, Catherine asked about expansion plans. We have funding for 3 more offices. Where do you want to focus? Elena considered the question. Cities with emerging tech sectors, but minimal legal protections for independent innovators. Austin, maybe. Seattle, Portland. Places where brilliant people are building companies but don't have resources to protect themselves from exploitation. The team discussed logistics, staffing needs, timeline. Elena contributed her perspective but didn't insist on having final say. She'd hired smart people. She could trust them to make good decisions. After the meeting, Margaret pulled her aside. You seem different, lighter somehow. I had a good weekend, Elena said. Pottery class, dinner alone, started writing something that might become a book. Actually rested instead of just performing rest while secretly working. Margaret smiled. Your father would be so proud. Not of the revenge or the foundation, though those matter. Of you learning to be whole instead of just effective. The words settled in Elena's chest like warmth. She'd been so focused on being effective. Effective at revenge, effective at building the foundation, effective at every single thing she touched. She'd forgotten that wholeness mattered more than effectiveness. That being fully human was more important than being perfectly productive. The cases continued through that week. Some victories, some losses, all of them mattering to the people involved. A graduate student retained her dissertation research. A software developer lost his case, but found employment with a company that valued ethical practices. A 14-year-old inventor got her parents connected with legal support before signing away her rights. Each case was a small battle in an infinite war. But small battles mattered. Individual lives mattered. The cumulative effect of protecting one person at a time, slowly shifting systems, gradually building precedent, that was how change actually happened. Friday afternoon brought news that the legislation Elena had testified about was moving forward. Not passed yet, but out of committee with bipartisan support. It would take months, maybe years, but movement was happening. Systems were slowly, grudgingly changing. Elena marked the victory quietly, without ceremony, then went to her pottery class. Her bowls were genuinely good now, still imperfect, still obviously handmade, but functional and beautiful in their own way. She gave one to Margaret, who cried and promised to keep it forever. That evening, sitting in her apartment with takeout from the Thai place down the street, Elena realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a nightmare about her father's death. The trauma hadn't disappeared. It probably never would entirely. But it had lost its sharp edges, become something she carried rather than something that carried her. She pulled out the cheap polyester dress from its frame on her wall and held it gently. This dress had been armor, strategy, the visible symbol of vulnerability that masked absolute control. It had served its purpose perfectly. But she didn't need armor anymore, didn't need to make herself small or vulnerable or grateful, didn't need to play roles or manipulate perceptions. She could just be Elena Cross, complicated and whole and still figuring things out, but genuine. She carefully folded the dress and put it in a storage box. Maybe someday she'd donate it to a museum or exhibition about justice and transformation. Or maybe she'd just keep it as a private reminder of who she'd needed to be to survive. The frame on her office wall now held a different image, a photograph from the Foundation's 1-year anniversary. Elena and Margaret surrounded by their team, all of them smiling genuinely, celebrating work that mattered. That felt like better representation of who Elena was becoming. 3 years after the wedding that broke the internet, Elena Cross stood at the Brooklyn waterfront again, this time with a small group of foundation staff celebrating a major victory. They'd won a Supreme Court case that fundamentally altered how intellectual property disputes were handled when power imbalances existed between parties. It was precedent-setting, revolutionary, the kind of systemic change that would protect thousands of innovators for decades to come. "Speech!" someone called out, echoing that night at the holiday party years ago. Elena raised her glass of champagne, real champagne now, because they could afford it, and denial of pleasure wasn't virtue. To everyone who refused to accept exploitation as inevitable. To the people who fought when fighting seemed impossible. To my father, whose stolen work built an empire, and whose daughter dismantled that empire and built something better in its place. To Marcus Cross, the group echoed. And to my mother, Elena continued, her voice catching slightly, who worked herself to death so I could survive, who taught me that dignity isn't determined by bank accounts or social class. Who would be proud that the foundation bearing her husband's name helps people just like we were? Brilliant, struggling, overlooked. They drank together as the sun set over the city, turning the water gold in the sky in possible shades of purple and orange. Later, alone in her apartment, Elena sat with her father's photograph one final time. Not because she needed to report success or seek approval, just because she missed him. Because even after justice and victory and systemic change, grief remained. But grief could coexist with joy now, with satisfaction, with the genuine happiness she'd built from ruins. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "Not just the revenge, the whole thing. We changed systems, protected people, built something that will outlast us all. And I learned to be happy again, to have a life beyond the mission. That's the real victory, I think. Not destroying the Hales, finding my way back to living." She set the photograph down and looked around her apartment. The pottery bowls, the books, the comfortable furniture, the pictures from foundation events. Evidence of a life genuinely lived, not just strategically survived. Tomorrow would bring more cases, more challenges, more people needing help. The work would continue indefinitely. Systems didn't change overnight. Justice was infinite effort toward an asymptotic goal. But Elena Cross had learned something crucial through pottery and therapy and 3 years of building instead of destroying. You didn't have to reach perfection to matter. You just had to keep showing up, keep trying, keep choosing the harder, right over the easier wrong. Keep being brave enough to build something better than what you inherited. The cheap dress in storage, the ugly, beautiful pottery bowls on her shelf, the foundation helping its 200th client, the legislation that would protect thousands more, the therapy sessions that taught her how to be whole, the weekend mornings reading fiction, the sunset walks by the waterfront, the genuine laughter with colleagues who'd become friends. All of it together, the pain and the healing, the revenge and the redemption, the darkness and the light, made up a life worth living, made up a legacy worth leaving, made up proof that trauma didn't have to win, that cruelty didn't get the final word, that the powerless girl in the cheap dress could become the woman who changed systems while learning to be happy. Elena turned off the lights in her apartment and went to bed. Tomorrow she'd wake up and continue the work. But tonight she'd sleep peacefully, knowing she'd honored her parents not just through justice, but through joy. Not just by destroying their murderers, but by building the future they'd wanted for her. A future where she was powerful and vulnerable, strategic and genuine, effective and whole. A future where the girl who said nothing for 15 years finally spoke and changed everything. A future where revenge was just the beginning and redemption was the real work. A future worth fighting for, worth building, worth living. And Elena Cross, daughter of Marcus and Maria, founder of the foundation that bore their legacy, had finally, impossibly, beautifully found her way home to it.